played with those colors, that new palette. It's starting to have some character. This is allowing me to learn to work with the palette without a lot of high investment. When experimenting with a palette you've never used, like I said, I just pulled out a 10 by 10. I didn't want to have a high investment in my materials. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wet Pastelist. That's kind of interesting color combination, right? It's kind of an interesting palette. Had fun with those colors. I'm really liking those colors. I would never ever have thought of this color scheme unless I saw it in a painting by another artist. And today I'm going to do one wet pastel technique using a fixity. But the primary purpose of today's video, and it's going to be a little quickie, I'm going to do a little 10 by 10 painting because I'm not looking for a finished painting. I'm looking to study colors that I found that I want to experiment with. These are the colors. I would have never thought to put some blue greens and magentas and red oranges and some pale grays together in a landscape painting. It's really interesting. So I want to experiment with an idea. I went and got a sketch out of one of my books. It's kind of like a mini tree screen. Nothing complicated. It's got a sky, it's got some trees in the background, trees in the foreground that are light color, a few shadows and highlights, foreground, and a middle ground that's lighter than anything else other than the tree trunks. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to use this particular Stolon palette of really interesting colors that I've never used and give you some advice as I go along on how I'm approaching this experiment. I'm not looking for a competition piece. I'm not looking for a finished painting that I could frame and sell. If that happens, sheer luck. I want to try them out and not have a lot invested, not a lot of time, not a lot of detail. And well, it's like they say, when you cook and you got a new recipe you want to try, well, you don't invite all your relatives over and decide to try it. You don't decide to try that recipe with a whole house full and have it fail. It's the same principle with art. We just start with a little picture and a little palette, but follow along and we'll see what happens. All right. And what this is a 10 by 10, so I'm not investing a lot of materials since it's a brand new color scheme for me. I'm going to try to make the shadow areas kind of a grayish blue green. And the trees are going to have light tree trunks. So, and that's something a lot of artists, and including myself, will forget to there's times where the tree trunks aren't dark as part of a landscape. So I'm going to try to use this kind of blue-greenish to create the dark. So I'm putting in the dark, big shapes first. And I'm going to have to go over, because the tree trunks are light and they're a very small part of the picture, I'm going to have to establish those trunks kind of at the end, like you would putting highlights in on a landscape. But I've liked this kind of color palette, and I've never used it, so this is going to be a challenge for me. And I always challenge myself, and that's obviously not blue-green. But this will be a color that will go up into the sky. This is a little bit of a pale blue, but I'm going to turn that to a much paler gray. But I'll put that in as kind of a place setter right now. And now I'm going to put this green over this kind of blue-violet. And then that same sky color over that, and I'm going to get that kind of blue-green. Actually, I think I'm going to put the sky color over first and then put the green on top. And I think I'll get a little bit more of the blue-green I'm looking for. So this particular color, I thought I had some colors in my box that were going to be that kind of grayish blue-green. So let's see if I can get that color. No, it's going to be a little grayer than that, but it is going to be at least the darkest color in there. Once I get the magenta in there, it's a little on the dark side. I'm going to lighten it up and get it a little grayer. I may find a neutral gray that'll help me do some of that. But there's my big shapes that are on the darker side of this particular piece. These are the trees off in the distance. Again, this is a 10 by 10. This is actually etching paper that I put clear gesso on. It's that paper that I collected one time when I thought I was going to do some etching. And I had 100 sheets of it about 20, 25 years ago. And my guy said stuff's a fortune now. But I bought it at a pretty reasonable price that many years ago. It was expensive even then, but now let me see if I can get those magentas and reds and pinks in there. You'll see when I drag that, look how when I drag that up in there, I drag that up into that blue-green, and it really, really marries well with that. I would have never thought, until I saw a painting done with these colors, I would have never thought that those colors would be. This is actually kind of a split complement palette when you break it down. But I would have never thought those colors would have looked so well in there. That clear gesso over that etching paper, that's going to seal it. So if I decide to do any, the etching paper will peel off. This is dry mounted on foam, but that etching paper would peel off if I just tried to draw on it. That etching paper takes pastel really well, but if I then try to put alcohol or any other wet medium on this, and I haven't decided whether I will or not, but if I did, it sometimes has a tendency to bubble up and peel and stretch and do weird things unless I coat it with clear gesso first. It's kind of a red-orange. Give me lighten some of that up maybe a little bit. This is a little bit of a green-gray, and I think that's going to be good to put in some of these tree trunks just as a place setter. Again, this is such a small canvas for using this much texture. Just going to get some big shapes and it'll end up as a study. I don't think I can get a lot of detail. I'm going to end up wanting to frame and show. But it might become a study enough that will let me do some things later. Kind of focusing on some of these shapes in between. That's that positive negative space that I like to play with when I've got trees that are just kind of standing in areas. They're all kind of the same width right now, but again, it's just the block-in stage. Once again, to show you, this is the piece from my sketch pad. We've got these darks, kind of this L-shaped dark with these trees in the distance and lighter areas here and the sky light. So I'm thinking this palette would be a good one to try with that and just see how it goes. Let's see if I can get some of these things in here. I'm not too concerned that I'll lose those trees. But we'll work some of this color. I'm going to work this color into the rough surface. It'll be easier to deal with subtleties. I'll get to see some of these blending edges a little bit, and that might make me want to make it kind of fuzzy and a little more abstract than what that drawing is. I mean, already I'm kind of liking those really soft edges on there. We'll get this kind of L-shaped compositional element in here. I think those pinks that are in here, the pinks and the blues, those are more like when you get near the end of this piece and you want to add some shadow areas or some highlight areas. The tree branches are really going to be the highlight area, but there's some other areas in the middle tones you might want to, or I might want to punch up a little bit. It's kind of interesting color combination, right? I would have never ever thought to combine these colors. You can see how I've got the big shapes in. I think I'm going to wet them down a little bit and see what happens with. I'll just put a little alcohol wash over that and see if I get some shapes within the bigger shapes. Actually, I changed my mind. I'm going to put some of the Spectrafix on there, which is, some people call it the Degas fixity. Pastels first came out and Degas started using them. He would use this. It's made primarily with milk byproducts. Casein is an extract leftover. It's part of the whey when you make cheese. I'm going to fix those big shapes before I go in there, and you'll see this darkens it down some. I'm not putting 3 or 4 coats on. 3 or 4 coats would make this fix. Matter of fact, I got it on so thick right there, you can see it's starting to run a little bit. I just want to fix or stain that canvas a little. Yeah, we'll get our blow dryer out. If I had hair, I would blow dry my hair while I wait for this to dry, but I don't have hair. So a good way to use my paint gun. It's got the thermostat on it, so I don't put it on real hot. Oh, I got my color swath sprayed. I better dry that too. I don't want that alcohol to, I don't know whether the alcohol that's in that whey would eat into that plastic or not. It's kind of an interesting palette. I'm trying to see if I can get a little brighter red down in here. These are supposed to be the lighter areas. This almost looks like a Gray Day palette. Because these colors are so close to one another on the grayscale, and they're darker colors rather than light, it just seems like this would be sort of the a Gray Day, but using the more abstract colors. And this field is a little more off in the background. I'm going to get that magenta back in there, but I think when I put this kind of pinkish color underneath and get the magenta over it, I'll get some of that atmospheric perspective that might be back in there. Yeah, that Spectrafix, which had the alcohol in it, rather than doing a wash, gave me some little shapes in here, since I sprayed it on a little heavier than I normally would. I can scumble some of that red, violet, magenta over that. Freshen up some of these magenta areas. And let's see if I'm going to stick some of that pink in there. That'll help maybe lighten up some of the tops of those blue-green trees. I'm not sure exactly where the sky holes would be yet. That's more of an in thing. Kind of grayish blue over that. Starting to break up and getting smaller pieces to work with in there. And I want to see if I can get these to more gray. They're really kind of green. That's not light enough yet. Let me get some more shape in here with some of these. This violet with some of the greens in there, and then I'll get some, I think I'm going to have to find some natural or a neutral gray to go in there. This might be all blocked up too much for what I'm trying to get done. Build some more tree branches and layers of branches. See if I can get what I'm looking at. That's too green still. I guess I need a blue-gray. See if I can get a blue-gray in there. That's getting closer over that violet and some of those greens that are in there. Just looks like a bunch of shapes right now, but that's okay. Like I always say, sometimes my paintings will tell me that they're going to go a little more abstract than what I think they're going to. Some of these limbs and things here closer, that might be too light. I want to get some greens in there in just a few places, not a lot. maybe somewhere in the 3 to 5% range. That might help some of these areas down in here, but they're closer to us. They might be where some of that light is coming through, I don't know. I think it's time to establish a little bit more of the lighter colored tree trunks that are in part of that tree screen portion. Just for right now, I think I'm going to, at the base of some of those trees, get some of this blue in there that's a little brighter, a little more intense. But I'm going to just keep it down at the base. Probably put some other colors over some of those things. At first glance, you look at the sketch and that looks like they've got white tree trunks. Trying to keep some character in there. But actually on my drawing it says light but not white trees is what my drawing notes when I made this out in the sticks. Probably on location. There's that blue. Try to make this tree a little skinnier. These trees almost touch one another as they go up into that sky and across those backgrounds. This comes out, comes back in, skips and jumps through those limbs. This is the thicker of the two trunks. There's some leaves that interfere, and I'll add those back in at the end. They interfere with the line of the trunk, so it's not like a straight line going up. And we got another little small tree over in this area. And pink is kind of a form of a violet. So the opposite of that is a yellow, so I can get some variation in here with some of this. But I want to keep those dark areas in some of this branch. So I'll come in here. Some of these trunks are still lighter than what I want them to be. This is a fluorescent orange. It doesn't photograph that way, but I'm wondering if that will lighten up some of that distant area where this goes back. I have to put that magenta back over it, but maybe it'll brighten some of that and create a little more atmosphere. Separation of foreground and middle ground. When experimenting with a palette you've never used, like I said, I just pulled out a 10 by 10. I didn't want to have a high investment in my materials. So that's a way to do it, because this may not be turned out. Well, actually, I'm pretty sure it's not going to turn out as oh gee, I really love that. But I'm liking the palette. This is allowing me to learn to work with the palette without a lot of high investment. If it fails, it fails, but it's really giving me a chance to see what these colors do for a palette that I was really interested in. I want to gray down. I want to get those trees a little more blue-gray, but I want to keep them, when you squint at that, I want those grays to be just a little darker. Let's see what this does. If I darken these things and get a little bit more blue-gray into these bunches of shapes, and then try to lighten them a little bit. That's too light. It's actually a homemade stick of gray that I had. That's almost a natural, or what we call a neutral gray. It doesn't have a bias. It might have a little bit of a green bias in it, but maybe if I put that down first and then get my blue-green over it, yeah, that's getting me closer. I got to put this lighter gray, neutral gray, a little bit of green-gray bias to make some of these tree shapes and these limb shapes and then go over it with my darker blue-green, and I think it will get me just a half value or a full value darker for these bunches of leaves than my maroons down in here. See, it's way lighter now when you squint at that. But let's get those blue-grays in there, letting some of that neutral gray show through. And we're starting to get some definition and some interest in some of these groupings of tree branches. And it's graying that down enough it's not going to compete with those maroons. I want my maroons and red maroons and light maroons to be the highlights. Therefore they're higher saturated and they don't have the grays that these shadows or these trees, the colors I've opted for, these blue greenish gray trees. And the sky now is going a little bit violet and blue, and I want to gray it down too. That's getting some interest in there. Those tree things will pop. And let's see what we got down in here. Base of some of these things, where these meet. We can get those down into that blue-gray also. And it's starting to have some character. Let me get that gray back in there, into those blue-grays, and now we'll get back in there with the darker. We'll darken those back down again with this kind of blue-green that now over that lighter gray will read more gray. This is where I'm getting almost to the point to put some highlight colors in. You get those tree trunks a little bit lighter in places where light might hit them. Yeah, that's toning that gray down, that neutral gray. This would be an area with sticks or grass. So again, I'm not too concerned about the details because this is just a way to practice these color selections. If I were to get close enough to something that I liked, I could enlarge this, but I'm liking that kind of orange back in there. That's not part of this palette. There's a little bit of orange in there, but I've lightened that kind of red-orange up, and I'm kind of liking that. Let's see if I can use a little darker. Yeah, where bases of trees might be, this is a little darker blue. And where some of those bases hit the ground, or clumps of whatever that is at the base of some of these trees, that might be a good way to just, keep it in the 1 to 3% range for that blue. And I'm saying these percentages, I'm talking about what percentage of the painting it is. For those that haven't watched this before, we look at trying to establish, something that is 70% one set of colors and values, or 80%, and then try to establish something that is 15%, and then that last 5% to make up 100% would be our little highlights for some of these trees and things, and up in those grasses. 70, 10, 5 and 5, light and dark. 80, 20, with the 20 being, the 15% of middle tone or some darker light, and then the last few percentage points highlights. So interesting. I haven't done much blending on this again because it's a little 10 by 10. I'm trying to see those color combinations. I'm interested in that. I wonder what this little fluorescent. I can see on the monitor that this fluorescent orange is not very vivid in probably the video, but boy, it really just looks like, specks of light hitting some of the edges of whatever would be in that background, going across that texture and bleeding down into some of this. I just don't think it'll read in photographs. I'm missing a nice bright red. This egg from Sanaye, I think it makes that, I forgot, is maybe a good intense red to scumble over some of these areas here in the magenta. Create a little bit more interest in some of those areas. Because red's a relative of that orange. Might be a good thing to drag over some of those blue-greens up in those distant trees. Let's see what we can do here. We want to get some of these trees to be a little bit more. I want to keep some of those pinks and some of those blues in there, but I want them a little lighter, so I think I'm going to try to scumble enough that with that heavy texture that they'll read through some of those things. And I got to lighten that sky up first before I put those tree trunks in there. Let's see if this is a gray enough. Yeah, I don't want them too blue and blue-violet. I think that's going to be gray enough to create that, the upper and lower part of that sky. Put a sky hole in here too. Get it up over in there. Maybe some right there. Since I got some orange there, this is a real pale yellow, and just in a few places, maybe right over here. I'm going to blend this. This is a violet, but by blending it, I'm getting a little bit more of that kind of blue-gray I'm looking for in that upper part of the sky. See if I can blend some of this in there. Now let's get those near white trees established and going up there. It's kind of pale yellow. Against that reads a little closer to a form of white. And just scumbling across, just so we get the effects of some of those blues and we don't go white and we don't go yellow. This tree a little larger than that other one, but I like that negative space. Yeah, that's a nice little highlight on there. Just a few little strokes over that violet where the light might be hitting. This is much darker than this, and it should be going through those tree branches. The light that hits those tree branches, the tree trunks through those branches is less intense than it is on these, which we don't have any tree branches on. So these going kind of a gray, just a few spots on this trunk. Don't want to get too far down in there because I want to keep those bases of those trees a little stronger blue in there. Lost a little of that down in here. Let's get that blue in there too. Interesting little palette. Will I use this again, this palette? Yeah, probably. I will. But this has taught me how to handle that palette, handle those colors. I should be able to remember some of the lessons from doing this. I might put some side branches, one or two in here. Seems to me that if these trees were at the edge of a fence line in an open field or meadow, there might be a few dead branches or branches coming down before these trees go up and blossom out at the top with a bunch of branches. But you never know. A lot of the times the farmers and the people will cut these branches off so the machinery can go by it. There's something happening here, so this might be a good opportunity to get one of those side branches in there. And because that's going through a sky hole, we'd have to do some texturing there. A little bit more interest in some of these clumps of trees might help them read a little bit better in this small piece. It's a whole lot easier to do in a piece that's just the next size up, 12 by 12 or 14 by 14 or 16 by 16, 20 by 20. These little details in these trees might be a little easier to make more convincing than what I'm doing right here. These more intense reds, and try to pull them up. I'm leaving the red down at the base, so I've got like this high intense red next to this kind of blue-green that is dull. So there's a good contrast there, but this, we'll call it magenta, bright red violet. I want this red to gradually blend into some, same way with this kind of dark blue. I'm going to leave the dark contrast area there, or the bright contrast. There's one of those red marks. Let's pull it up in, but leave the bottom edge kind of sharp. Bigger piece, I could use a brayer. Solidify some of this, soften it up into some of these areas. Well, there we have it. Tried a new palette. Trying to give you an idea that when you capture a palette, steal a palette, or think of a color combination, rather than go right into something that, oh gosh, I want to make this a good painting that maybe it'll be for competition or show. Forget all that. Don't put your pressure on with a new palette. Go through here and just take a small piece of paper, take a drawing. It could be one that you want to eventually become a competition piece, but don't start right in on a big piece. Play with those colors, that new palette. Get used to it, see what the little tweaks and twerks that you can do to make it read. It's kind of abstract to this size, especially when you're working with textured papers like I'm doing. If this was not a textured paper and it was 10 by 10, I probably would, this could have been a finished piece, but that texture creates way less ability to create the details necessary to make this read. Not sure, I may play around later with some of these trees up in here. They kind of read the same going up, and I may make some variation, put some branches in, but it did what I wanted to do. I wanted to try these colors. I want to try these colors out. Here's the drawing again if you want to see. The trees were light. I made that note that they were light to keep them light, but they're not white. So I've got kind of a wedge of dark area here. I've got a middle ground between my background trees, and the sky's a little darker than this middle ground. So by putting that fluorescent red-orange in there, and again, you're not seeing that fluorescence, but that really pops. I've noticed when I use fluorescent pastels that they don't photograph well. They photograph lighter than what's on each side of them, but they don't pop until you see them in person. So that'll be a little hard. That's a challenge for folks using fluorescent pastels. That's a challenge because unless your piece is being judged in person, the judges aren't going to see that significant difference. Had fun with those colors. I'm really liking those colors. I would never ever have thought of this color scheme unless I saw it in a painting by another artist and stole the colors and then pulled them out later to try to make my own painting. So that's it, everybody. Hope you got something out of that, and we'll see you next week with another video, and happy painting. Take care. Bye-bye.